It's already been over 2 months since Polaris Dawn flew a private crewed spaceflight operated by SpaceX on behalf of Jared Isaacman, and this is the first of three planned missions in the Polaris program. This mission, as we saw, completed the first ever private commercial spacewalk, testing out the new SpaceX EVA suits and so much more. It was also a mission full of scientific research. You've probably heard that there were 36 experiments from 31 partner institutions from across the world, but you probably don't know all of the nitty-gritty details of all of those experiments. Now, we as the public don't have the full findings from that research, and I'm really eager to learn what they learned on their flight, but I wanted to talk about some of the things that they were studying and why it's important. One of the most prominent issues is motion sickness with spaceflight. That's why Johns Hopkins University wanted to study this with the Polaris Dawn mission. Motion sickness is commonly experienced in spaceflight both upon entering space and after returning to Earth. However, there's a lot of individual variability both to the degree of motion sickness and how long it lasts. One theory to explain these differences lies in the tiny crystals that reside inside the inner ear and sense gravity. The theory is that some people have more or larger stones in one ear than the other, or are more sensitive to their motion on one side than the other, and that the brain has learned to compensate for this difference with asymmetry. However, in space, this learned compensation is not appropriate since it was learned in 1G on Earth, and this causes space motion sickness. So this study will test the differences between the two ears using a tablet computer. If motion sickness is caused by this asymmetry, this could give astronauts insight to motion sickness susceptibility and help them prepare accordingly. SpaceX had some experiments of their own, including continuous glucose monitoring. One of the driving goals is to make space accessible to more people, and with more than 10% of the population in the United States being diabetic, the ability to monitor glucose levels in space will allow diabetic astronauts to fly with confidence, knowing they can manage their diabetes as well in space as on the ground. The fluid shifts that occur in space may affect the accuracy of continuous glucose monitors, so the study aims to validate a continuous glucose monitor over the duration of the Polaris Dawn mission. I ran into someone who I thought you would find interesting while I was in Maine, where I interviewed a former SpaceX employee. I briefly attended the Maine Space Conference, which aims to bring a space economy to Maine and even create a spaceport in Maine. And while I was there, I met the chief scientist for NASA's Human Research Program. Obviously, I'm trying to cover the logistics side of going to Mars by heavily covering the Starship program, but there's also other factors to consider, which is human health in space, and it's certainly something that we're still learning about more and more as we have more human spaceflight.
Several astronauts have talked about when they went into space, they got taller, right? Because the curvature of their spine changes, or whether the thickness of their discs changes, right? So they're all happy because they're taller in space. As soon as they come back to Earth, it goes back, right? As soon as you're exposed back to gravity, it comes back. We can't do CTs, we can't do MRIs, but we can do some amazing things with ultrasound, things that people told us we'd never be able to do. They adapt, but then when they come back to Earth, those crystals then go back. So now they have to readapt again, because when they get down to Earth, the brain's telling them a lot of information and it's kind of an overload. We're doing research now on how we'll need to modify the food systems to make them acceptable to the crew for that much longer journey. My name is Steve Platts, Steveplatts.
And your title?
I'm the Chief Scientist of the Human Research Program at NASA, Johnson Space Center.
So you came all the way from Houston to Maine.
I did.
Why?
Well, one of the more interesting parts of my job is education and outreach, talking to people, letting them know that we exist, because it's amazing. Many people don't realize how much biological research, how much life science research there is at NASA. There are two major programs, HRP, which is my program, and then space biology, that fund biological research. And it isn't just research that helps us go to the moon or Mars, although that is our primary objective. But a lot of that research also applies here on Earth. We've done lots of studies that apply to the medical labs. We had one drug that we were working on for blood pressure control, because our astronauts can get low blood pressure when they come back from a long duration in space. And the paper that we wrote for that was used in the clinic to treat a diabetic patient. And so those kind of things happen all the time. And so just coming here and saying, hey, we exist, we fund grants that mitigate the risks we have to astronauts. Come write some grants for us. Here's what we do, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. And we're trying to just get that message out and get more voices to contribute to our mission. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, I went on a 0G flight and I puked my brains out, and that was just a small little taste. And so that just made me realize, wow, this is, some serious stuff that's happening to your body. Mm-hmm. And I can't even imagine, the effects of that in space. So you were talking about 5 sort of hazards.
Yes.
You want to walk through those?
Sure. We call them RIDGE, right? Because we have to have an acronym because it's NASA. So it's radiation, isolation, distance from Earth, how far you are away, and then gravity or lack thereof. It tends to be lack thereof. And then the environment. So the environment would be, are you inside a space station? Are you inside a capsule? Are you inside a rover or something like that? And so the different parts of that are different depending on your mission. So for low Earth orbit, it's a lot of gravity and some environment, but for Mars, a lot of it's going to be distance from Earth and isolation. You won't have your family. You won't have resupply of food, so you won't be getting, the fresh foods from Earth that go up to the station periodically. And so we need to be cognizant of that so we know how to prevent any issues from occurring in these different types of missions.
Yeah, what are some of the things that you're doing today, thinking ahead to Mars? Obviously, there's like the logistics of getting there, but we can't just twiddle our thumbs and expect that everything's going to work out on the human side. So what are you doing today?
Right. Yeah, some of it is that we don't know what we don't know kind of a thing, right? And so I think it was almost 10 years ago, a little more, where we discovered, it's called SANS, spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome, right? We hadn't seen this in space shuttle. We had never realized what was going on, but we see changes in the shape of the eye, changes in some of the anatomy of the eye, and then we started to see some of the changes in the brain too. And we started doing a lot of research. The medical community became aware of it. And so now it's one of our top risks. So far, when astronauts come back from space, it's reversible. And so it's temporary. And these are the things that make space really interesting, is a lot of things that happen are temporary, right? As soon as you come back to Earth, things go back to normal. Like several astronauts have talked about when they went into space, they got taller, right? Because the curvature of their spine changes, or whether the thickness of their discs changes, right? So they're all happy because they're taller in space. As soon as they come back to Earth, it goes back, right? As soon as you're exposed back to gravity, it comes back. And so SANS so far does the same thing. One of the things we're concerned about is a 3-year mission to Mars. What's going to happen there? And so a lot of research is being done now on characterizing each little part of it. How do we prevent it? What are the things? Are there genetic components? Are there physiological components? Are there anatomical components? Is it because, you have blood vessels in certain locations or whatever might occur? And so we're doing a lot of research on that.
So if it wasn't to reverse, what does that look like? Blurry vision, or what is?
Yeah, what they typically see is their prescription changes. And so we actually fly special glasses where you can change the prescription so they can see in flight. And so it would be like a change in their prescription.
Wow.
Or something like that.
That is so fascinating. I'm sure you followed the Polaris Dawn mission and all of were you guys involved with any of the health experiments they were doing?
Yes, we had some experiments there, and Trish, who is one of our partners that we fund through a cooperative agreement, they had experiments on Polaris Dawn as well.
Yeah. Any of them piqued your interest, or?
It's hard when it's a short mission and it's only a few crew members. So as a scientist, I'm always leery to talk too much about that until we try and confirm, but there are always interesting things. And one of the best uses of the research effort there is hardware checkouts or technology developments. What kind of ultrasound machine will we want to use? What types of experiments would we want to do? And those kind of things are really useful on that type of a mission.
Talk about your career path and how you sort of found yourself here, maybe unexpectedly.
Yeah, it is a little unusual. So I got my undergraduate degree in zoology. So I wanted to go to Australia and study marsupials. That didn't quite work out. So then I got my PhD at Texas A&M in human physiology. And I was finishing up my postdoc at the University of Virginia, and NASA was advertising for a vascular physiologist, which was my particular area of interest. They were flying experiments looking at how blood vessels respond to spaceflight, right? Do they get smaller? Do they get larger? Do they contract more or less? And so I applied and I got the job, and that was 22 years ago. So I've been there ever since. I never thought in a million years I'd be working for NASA, right? I always thought I would be, a professor at a university getting money from NIH to study my favorite little protein, right? Working in a microscope, and that's not what I do at all. So really interesting. And so it shows there isn't just one path to do anything. There are many, many, many different careers you can have, even with the same degree.
Right.
So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, I don't have any background in science and technology, and I'm a full-time YouTuber covering space. So it's like, It's very interesting. So a lot of people that I encounter, they don't understand why we even want to go to Mars. They think we should focus on the problems here on Earth. And I think this kind of sort of leads into the health aspect too, of like, maybe help people understand that doing research in space actually does benefit us here on Earth.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've been involved with several experiments that ended up having benefits here on Earth, and we see it all the time, right? If you use a cordless drill or any kind of tool, that came from space. GPS, your cell phone, almost everything we touch has had a path through NASA one way or another, and I firmly believe that by doing the research we do and by going to the moon and Mars and beyond, right, that we benefit all of mankind. It's not just a club for astronauts or something. It's much bigger than that, and it really does pervade our culture even, and it's part of the national pride, I think, is being involved in space and maintaining that. So I think it has many, many benefits. Yeah.
Which of the 5 hazards are you most worried about?
I would say distance from Earth, I think, because that's something we can't really change, right? If it's gravity or something else, we can figure out a way to modify or tweak that in some way. But distance from Earth, if they're 3/4 of the way to Mars and something happens, I can't bring them home, right? So I need to have thought ahead of time how we're going to treat any medical issues, how we're going to prevent medical issues, and how they're going to be able to operate autonomously in that environment. And so all those things combined, I think this distance from Earth is the part I'm worried about the most.
What might surprise people that's up at the ISS that is used as part of your medical or human research?
Well, I mentioned before that we use a lot of ultrasound, right? It's ultrasound for imaging is really the only modality we currently have until we have much better technology and miniaturized X-ray technology and things like that, which people are working on. We can't do CTs, we can't do MRIs, but we can do some amazing things with ultrasound, things that people told us we'd never be able to do. And so, it's very common to look at blood vessels with ultrasound in babies. You see it all the time in the hospital. They look at all your internal organs. But we've been able to look at broken bones, and we've been able to look at tendon inflammation and all these things you don't normally use ultrasound for. We've done studies where we can see those. And so in an emergency situation, if it occurs, we can use that ultrasound to do a lot more things than you typically think of. on a kind of a fun note, the thing that people probably don't realize that used to be on station is an espresso machine. So the Italians flew an espresso machine sort of as an experiment in fluid dynamics, right? And think about how you have to you don't have gravity, so you don't have a drip. And so how do you do that and make that? And then how do you drink that? They had these special pouches that had a tube attached. And so the Italian Space Agency did that as an experiment in fluid dynamics. And it was really interesting. And the astronauts loved it.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably the most unusual thing that I know of that flew up there.
Yeah. Are you excited for the future of like commercial space stations?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot in the works. Why do you think those are beneficial and, compared to what we have today?
Well, having stations that are devoted to that purpose will make it easier to do that work. So if you have a station that was designed to do manufacturing and research and things like that, we all know that crystals grow different in space, and that's a big benefit that a lot of commercial entities are looking at. But also there are some that are proposing different from ISS ways of doing business on their stations. It'll be really interesting to see which stations end up flying and not, and do they fly the way they're saying now, or are they going to tweak? Mm-hmm. And what are the mission durations going to be? What are the crew going to look like? All those kind of things are really exciting. Just the explosion of commercial space is kind of mind-blowing. And 10 years ago, you never would have thought that there would be this much going on in the commercial sector, but it's really blooming, and it's really exciting.
Speaking of crystals, you were giving an example of what might be disorienting with your ears.
Ah, yes.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So the way that our body senses direction and motion is in the inner ear, and there are these crystals called otoliths. And they're in the inner ear, and they rest on what are called hair cells. And that's the way for your body to detect where you are, up and down, side to side, are you moving, all those kind of things. When you go into space, those float. And so they're no longer giving you that up-down signal. And so that's disorienting at first. And the crew gets used to it, though. They get used to the orientation that they have without having an up or down. And so they adapt, but then when they come back to Earth, those crystals then go back. So now they have to readapt again, because when they get down to Earth, the brain's telling them a lot of information, and it's kind of an overload. And so you'll often see them come off of vehicles, and they're kind of looking straight ahead, and they're just trying to get that up, down, side to side, and then the motion of your head side to side can be provocative. So we have about 50% or so crew members have space motion sickness. And so that's something we often have to treat. And yeah, I can't fly on a 0G flight because I'm way too susceptible to motion sickness. So
it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was so bad. And the thing is, like, you can't stop it. You can't say, hey, by the way, can we cut it short?
Right.
You have people that paid, I won the flight. Everyone else paid $15,000 to fly with astronauts, Charlie Duke and Doug Hurley, which was cool. But, it's just interesting. It's like you guys are doing so much research, but at some point, the human body can only take so much. Do some of those things worry you that, like, can we really, last in beyond the moon?
Yeah, the body is so resilient and so adaptable. I really think we can. And a lot of what you're talking about, we have, now they don't work for everybody, right? And that's part of the interesting thing too, is just the diversity of human response, right? People don't realize how differently we all respond to things. And you can think about it like some people like ibuprofen, some people like aspirin, some people like Tylenol. Why? Why doesn't one drug work the same for everybody? It's because our genetics are all different, right? And the same thing goes with spaceflight. You see all these different types of responses. But the body is incredibly resilient. And some of those space motion issues, we're working on what we call countermeasures, that's treatments, on how to prevent it or stop it. So different types of stimulation. So there's stimulators that can go behind the ear that we're working on. There are different medications that we're working on. And there's even just some training that we're working on. How you move your head, how you move your body can train you to not have some of those symptoms. So just using that as an example, I think we can train that and work that. And just as far as the general, can we go to Mars? Absolutely, I think we can. The body is remarkable. And I think we know enough and we will know enough to make that safe.
Well, I feel like, people think, oh my gosh, being an astronaut, that'd be so cool. But these astronauts are sacrificing so much. This does not sound easy by any measure to me. It sounds absolutely exhausting. The sleep, like you were talking about. I mean, there's so many things that make this probably one of the most uncomfortable jobs in the world, or out of the world at times. Like, do you think the public really understands what all is involved?
No, I don't. And I don't think you can ever tell anybody. It's just all the little day-to-day things, like the sunset and sunrise every 90 minutes, right? So how do you sleep through that?
What do you do?
They have, you can put on a mask, and they have little sleeping compartments that they can block out the sun, and it's, they can do other things to control the light. But there are lots of different things like that. Just being cooped up in this, flying space station with 6, 8, 10 other people all the time, that can be interesting for people. And the food, right? You eat the same foods kind of over and over, so that can get monotonous for people. And right now, we can kind of fly up some goodies to help them break that monotony, and we can fly up fresh foods and things. But going to Mars, we're not going to be able to do that. So we're doing research now on how we'll need to modify the food systems to make them acceptable to the crew for that much longer journey.
So you came to Maine, obviously to spread awareness. So a lot of people watch my channel, a lot of exposure. What do you want to tell to someone who maybe is like curious and getting involved with their own company or whatever, but doesn't really know if they would play a role?
Everybody can play a role, right? You don't have to be an astronaut to have a role in the space industry. It's everywhere. One of the other speakers was talking about how we'll need welders and just every kind of trade you can imagine. And the same goes even on the science side. Research technicians to do the work, and engineers to do the work and design the hardware. There's all kinds of people. You'd never believe how many people it takes to do missions like this. So if you're interested even a little bit, or even if you're just thinking, I don't know what I want to do, is this something that would interest me? Check it out and see if it would interest you. I never thought in a million years I'd be in the space industry, and yet I've been here for over 20 years. So I would just say, check it out and go for it. Don't censor yourself, right? And don't let other people tell you, no, it's not interesting. No, you can't do it. It's not worthwhile. If you're interested in it, you can do it.
Well, it's going to take a team effort for us to really get to Mars. Do
Absolutely.
you think it'll happen?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I don't know if it'll happen while I'm still working at NASA, or if I'll be sitting on my deck sipping a glass of wine and watching it happen, but it will definitely happen.
So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you're curious, I hope that this video inspires you to get involved. Thank you so much for watching my channel, and again, I'll be keeping my eye out for more results from the Polaris Dawn experiments and research, and hopefully we get those soon, because I think it's really interesting how much they tried to do while they were up there, and time will tell how much they learned over that process.